Thank you, Alan. It's now 23 minutes to 9. Scotland's record drug death rates have often been a health crisis in the shadows. But in the latest Scottish election leaders debate, the First Minister Nicola Sturgeon admitted to the Conservative leader Douglas Ross that her government had, quote, taken its eye off the ball. It's a story that's played out on the streets rather than in the Holyrood Parliament. As part of his series in the lead up to the May 6th election, our special correspondent Jim Naughtie now reports from Glasgow.
When I was 13 years of age, I was going through difficulties in school, and my guidance teacher had spoken to my mum, and she suggested that I go to a child psychologist, who then put me on diazepam at the age of 13. And I think that opened up a whole new world to me. I was going to a chemist and people were seeing what I was getting prescribed. I was being approached by strangers, and so I think that's how it opened up the doors to that kind of life.
And a dark world. This young woman's story takes you into streets where there's another public health crisis, with drugs, in Scotland's biggest city.
I was put on methadone at the age of 17, and I was on that until I was 35 years of age. I was never told about recovery. I was never asked if I wanted brought down. It was never suggested. It was always like, it's coming up for Christmas time, it's going to be a very stressful time for you. Do you want to go up? That's their answer to everything. It's just to kind of hit you with more drugs, and that's absolutely not the answer.
For people prescribed methadone as an opioid substitute, there's a crisis too often in the shadows. The highest HIV spread anywhere in the UK for nearly 40 years. Drug deaths that per capita are the highest in Europe, a record that doctors in the field say is one of the worst in the developed world. I'm in the dispensary of a pharmacy at the east of the city centre in Glasgow, where they're dispensing methadone from a machine over there in a corner a little bit away from the front door and the main shelves in the pharmacy. And at that front door I can see the queue of patients that builds up each morning. I'm with one of the directors of the small chain of pharmacies represented here, who can tell me what's going on.
During the pandemic, it's been quite a difficult time for most community pharmacies because they've been one of the few places that were open. So trying to prevent drug death, supervised methadone, giving out clean needles is all part of the harm reduction that pharmacies do. In Scotland, the drug deaths have increased, so whatever's happening in Scotland is not working as well as it could. We should have a safe injection facility. If you look at Canada, Vancouver, they've had a safe injection facility for 20 years. We've got dirty needles here, we've got neighbours who are complaining, rightly so. We've got people injecting in the alleyways. That needs to change, and the way we need to change is look at what's best practice around the world.
That would need changes to the Misuse of Drugs Act, which is UK legislation that applies to Scotland. But spending priorities here in Glasgow are a matter for the Scottish Government itself. On the question of injection centres, in these streets there's a one-man protest going on. Not far from the pharmacy in the same part of the city, I'm turning now into a narrow close leading off the street in search of a van which I can see just a few yards away. It looks at first as if it's painted in police colours and bright stripes, but it's not that at all. This is the overdose prevention van.
As you've seen, there was 3 people in here injecting. 2 people injected cocaine, and then 1 person was injecting heroin, and then...
Peter Crikand is a former heroin addict. His van, it has no legal jurisdiction, provides a space where people can come to inject drugs safely.
When you walk out this van, 20 yards away, there's lots of discarded equipment. You can see the spoons that have been used. It's really unsterile. There's rats, there's faeces, urine. So people have got an option while we're here. They inject in that filthy alleyway, or they inject in here. We only require that people use their own equipment. They don't share injecting equipment. They agree to an intervention, and there's no abusive behaviour.
And so the people who are coming here, like the people we've just seen going into the van and closing the door behind them, are regular drug users who take advantage of this service to have a clean place in which to inject themselves.
Clean, well-lit, sterile conditions, yes. Of course we don't supply any drugs and we don't condone drug use. However, people are using these illegal substances.
He's standing in the election as an independent on this one question. The social consequences of drug abuse, violence, crime, as well as personal disaster, are well known. Dr Andrew Macaulay, an epidemiologist and a reader in public health at Glasgow Caledonian University, finds the response, historically and right now, depressing.
We've had gradual cuts over the last decade linked to the austerity programme, which have had an impact on all public sector finances. But there were more direct cuts placed on the addiction services from around 2015-16 onwards, of around 20 to 25%. Scotland's drug-related death epidemic did not start in 2015. Scotland was at the top of the UK league table for drug-related deaths, the European league table for drug-related deaths at that time. And there was certainly no indication in the data at that point that things were trending in a positive direction. Things have certainly accelerated since then in a more aggressive trend. The justification for cutting funding to drug treatment services at that time seems baffling to me.
When I sat down in Kelvin Grove Park with that woman in her 30s who's been an addict for most of her life, on a sunny day with Glasgow easing out of COVID lockdown and seeming to have spring in its step, I was reminded of how many blighted lives lie just under the surface. I asked Kirsten Horsburgh of the Scottish Drugs Forum, who's critical of a lack of investment in the past, if there was any good news.
So what we've seen in Scotland recently has been the appointment of a drugs policy minister who will report directly to the First Minister, and the creation of a drugs policy division within Scottish Government, and the promise of significant investment over the next 5 years. So that will absolutely help to improve treatment services.
Peter Crikant and his overdose prevention van, the pharmacist who wants safe injecting rooms, doctors all say this should be part of an election campaign because, as I heard from Jason Wallace, who's in long-term recovery from drug use and works in the addiction field, it does involve everyone.
If we listen to the media, you would be led to believe an individual like that was responsible for the housebreakings and the car thefts and the crime that occurred in your area. Well, actually the reality is that was a child whose addiction began by a prescribed medication that we're speaking about. But at some point in that journey, they ceased to become a child and started to become a problem to society. And this is the stuff we're no addressing and challenging, because this story isn't unique. There's lots of individuals who that will be their entry into drug use, addiction, whatever it may be.
The social cost for everyone is high. And for individuals, it's a long and hard road back. I asked the woman I spoke to about her addiction what it would be like when, with the help of the drugs fellowship that gives her support, she felt she was clean. She said she'd be euphoric. She'd feel like the Incredible Hulk. But what was it like waking up on an ordinary morning without support?
I live in hell. An absolute living hell. I was suicidal. I didn't want to do it, but I couldn't stop doing it. I didn't want to wake up. It's so powerful that you can't stop. You don't want to get up. You just don't. You don't want to get up out of your bed. You don't want to live. You just don't want to go on. People need to be helped. People can't be forgotten about, and this is what's happening. This is what I was told the other day. I was told I wasn't a priority. So what's a priority then? I need to be at death's door. I need to have overdosed. What makes me a priority?
One woman's experience of addiction, ending that report by Jim Naughtie.